NANI?
He needs some milk.
Oh, me and my dusty wigs. My name is Laurier and welcome to my channel, Old Dirty History. And today we are diving into the complex yet very inspiring history of Black women in television in the United States. Because for decades, Black artists have had to slowly carve out space on screen, not just to be seen, but to tell fuller and truer stories. Those stories are ignored, repackaged, and this isn't just a media trend. This is a historic pattern. A pattern that I'm gonna break down in this video. But before all that, please be sure to like and share the video and leave a comment while you're at it. And what the hell, subscribe to the channel too. You go ahead and just do that. Oh boy, so this is a pretty big topic with not a lot of time. So where should we begin? Let's start at the beginning, the very beginning, the Beulah Beginning. The first Black woman to grace our screens as a lead in a network sitcom was the one and only Ethel Waters in Beulah. And this was during the early 1950s. Ethel Waters was a trailblazing African-American singer and actress who broke barriers in both music and film. She was born in 1896 and she rose to fame in the 1920s and 30s as a blues, jazz, and gospel performer before transitioning to the stage and the screen. She became the second Black woman ever nominated for an Academy Award for her role as Dicey Johnson in Pinky. I've mentioned this before in my video on the Blaxploitation era. Growing up, I had access to a wide variety of amazing films from back in the day. And this is because my mother, over the many years, had amassed this gigantic VHS collection. And this collection included films like Pinky, as well as Cabin in the Sky. And these are both really phenomenal films that Ethel Waters was featured in. And you know, I'm a kid growing up in the 1990s. I think that really goes to show the kind of impact that Ethel Waters had in entertainment, because here I am, you know, just little me, a kid, watching this black and white film from the 50s and the 90s, you know, and I'm sure I am not the only one. So people were still enjoying and continue to this day still enjoy her work. And Ethel Waters was gorgeous. She had an amazing voice. She was so talented. And I remember thinking when I would watch her films as a little girl that this woman could just light up a screen, even in black and white. Her smile, her vocal range, her acting chops. I mean, this woman was amazingly talented. So it's no surprise that Ethel Waters would be the one to start this legacy of chipping away at this barrier when it came to Black women in television. Now, was Beulah a very historic moment in American television? Most definitely. But let's not romanticize it too much. The character Beulah was a walking, talking mammy stereotype, the jolly domestic servant whose whole identity was propping up a white family. That was the character Beulah. And during Ethel Waters' time in this role as Beulah, she voiced her issue with the role. She acknowledged that this role was built on a stereotype. And eventually she walked away from the role altogether. And I can only begin to imagine how difficult that decision might have been for Ethel Waters. You know, again, as messed up as the role was, historically speaking, this role was a very big deal. But these type of mammy-esque roles at this time were really the only type of roles that were made available to Black women, and not just in television, but in film as well. And then Hattie McDaniel took on this role. Hattie McDaniel's contributions to paving the way for Black actors and Black women specifically was monumental. But she's gotten a lot of flack over the years for taking on roles that were inspired by the mammy stereotype. Her role in the 1940 film Gone with the Wind is a role that often comes to the mind when you think of mammy-inspired roles.
Now you come on, give me them pants, Mr. Kennedy. Come on. Now you scrub yourself with that strong lye soap before I come down and scrub you myself. I'm going to put these bitches in the violent pot. The Confederate armies got the same troubles, crawling, clothes, and dysentery.
Feel hand. That's the mean Miss Helen done labored with you.
Miss Scarlett, come on in the house. Come on in before you catch your death of dampness.
No, I'm going to wait for Pa to come home from the Wilkses.
Come on in here. Come on.
But her work was an early step in helping to start chipping away from that barrier that existed in entertainment for Black women. And while these types of roles helped break down the barrier, this type of representation paired with erasure, it did kick off a trend that still echoes. Black women are allowed to be seen, just not fully, not loudly, and not truthfully, only when making white audiences comfortable. The 1960s was a chaotic but necessary time in U.S. history. Civil rights protests, JFK, Malcolm X, Dr. King, but on TV, it was still white picket fences and laughing tracks. The idealized white family reigned supreme, while black folks were either missing or watered down to comic relief. Shows like The Andy Griffith Show and Dick Van Dyke Show really defined what the status quo was on television during this era. And sure, from time to time you would see black guest stars like Cicely Tyson, but oftentimes they were tokenized, never truly at the center, and rarely ever portraying the realities of being black in America at this time. And then came Nichelle Nichols as Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek in 1966. And in this character, she wasn't a maid, she wasn't comic relief, she was a communications officer on a starship. And there was a period during her time in this role where she was actually going to leave the show, but Martin Luther King told her to stay. He told her, "You've opened a door that can never be closed again." He saw her as the future and not a token, but proof that black people belonged in that imagined future. And while we're on the subject of Star Trek, let's not forget the scripted non-consensual or forced kiss that Uhura and Captain Kirk shared that is widely considered to be the first interracial kiss on television. And not to diminish the importance of this scene, but I was thinking about it and I kind of find it interesting that the way they had to write in this kiss was by non-consent. Otherwise, was that the only way this scene could be written? But 1960s, we're slowly chipping away at this point. And then there was the beautiful and talented Diahann Carroll, who starred in the show Julia that premiered in 1968. And what was groundbreaking about this role was that Diahann Carroll played a middle-class nurse and single mother. This was the first time a black woman led a TV series in a role that wasn't science fiction or that didn't play into some level of servitude. But during this time, many of these type of roles were depoliticized and whitewashed. So TV started suggesting change, but not really confronting anything that was close to the realities of what was going on around people in the United States. Now let's flash forward to the 1970s. Representation has increased, but many of the stereotypes and whitewashing roles remain. And these stereotypes have a lasting impact on the masses, especially for people who are not in black spaces. There was an interesting media study that I came across in my research that examined the trends of television shows during this period. And it found that shows with predominantly black casts were often written with exaggerated caricature traits that often struggled financially. In contrast, black characters on integrated shows tended to be portrayed in more assimilated roles. This reflected broader industry patterns about what kinds of black representation were considered, quote, acceptable for different audiences. It's giving respectability politics. If you want to be worthy, you must assimilate. You better code switch like your life depends on it. Something that I've noticed is that there really has been no middle ground. You're either this or you're that. You either are living in an impoverished situation and struggling, the whole stereotype, or any semblance of black identity, black culture is stripped away. And this study also talked about how, unsurprisingly, television teaches children. Many kids grew up in front of television screens, especially kids that were growing up in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and so forth. So what they're seeing on television is their education. And this doesn't just go for white viewers, but also black viewers too. Television is teaching us what blackness is, what it means. TV told them the, quote, good black folks are well-behaved sidekicks in white spaces, and the others, punchlines in segregated ghettos. Then there was Esther Roll's role as Florida Evans in Good Times, another groundbreaking show during this time. But Good Times is an example of a show with a predominantly black cast that was groundbreaking, but still pushed some of these antiquated stereotypes. Florida Evans was originally introduced as the housekeeper on the show Maude, where she was so popular that CBS spun her off into Good Times. On Good Times, she was the matriarch of a working class black family living in a Chicago housing project, and she was married to James Evans Sr., played by the legend John Amos. And together they raised 3 kids, JJ, Thelma, and Michael. And Esther Rolle was very outspoken about how she felt about the way Good Times was written, including the show's characters. Originally, the Evans family was written to be a family without a father. You heard right. The show Good Times was supposed to depict a single black mother, a common depiction of black families in television up to this point. But when Esther Rolle learned of this, she refused to participate in the show. She did not want to see another black family on television with an absent father, and she felt very strongly about that. And then John Amos was brought in to play the patriarch role of the family, James Evans Sr. Diahann Carroll's character in Julia was definitely revolutionary for the 60s, but even Carroll said that her character was, quote, colorless. No ties to community, no culture. And it was designed to make white audiences feel safe. And this formula was carried into the 1980s in television. And actually, The Cosby Show ran with this approach. Upper middle class, respectable, conflict-free, blackness was polished and palatable, stripped of the societal struggles that many black families face. But Felicia Rashad's role as Claire Huxtable was iconic. She was depicted as a successful, assertive, and family-oriented woman who also had a career as a lawyer. Now that's a lot, okay? That is a lot for a person to live up to. And you know, when I say that out loud, I think to myself, was this character rooted in reality? The Huxtables was a family of 7, often portrayed as the idealized nuclear family. You have 2 successful working class parents, upper middle class. One is a lawyer, one is a doctor, and you have 5 children that they're supporting. And they're all just so perfect. Claire is always perfect and able to juggle the demands of being a mother of 5 as well as a lawyer. And this sets an unrealistic expectation of the working class mother. Most people aren't lawyers married to a doctor with 5 perfect children and a perfect marriage. And some of the Cosby Show's critics have accused the show of being very whitewashed to make it more palatable, again, for white audiences, because the realities of racial struggles were minimized, and the Huxtables lived a privileged life that was often unrelatable to many of its viewers. But you know, with that being said, the show's impact cannot be denied. It was a great show, and it was one of many shows that happened over the course of this historical timeline that helped chip away at that barrier. But what I find interesting when I think about this whitewashing of the characters and, you know, the whole family on the Cosbys, when I think about the disparaging things that Bill Cosby has said about the black community. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just look up the pound cake speech. Yes, I know that sounds goofy. What the is a pound cake speech? Look it up, okay? When you think about the disparaging things that Cosby has said about black folks, it really comes as no surprise that this was the type of family that he wanted to depict when it came to specifically a black family. We can assimilate, you know, we can act just like you, be just like you, have your vernacular. We're educated, which why can't you be educated and rooted in your blackness and your culture and your identity? Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Let's continue. These type of shows gave off the impression of, if you want to succeed on screen, don't be too black. Be exceptional. Be apolitical. Be quiet. Don't be problematic or cause too much noise. The 1980s was a paradox because black entertainers were everywhere at this time, but assimilation was pushed. And just like with the Cosbys, this was a time where there were so many black characters on television, but their ties to blackness was not very strong, if there at all. Black men were desexualized, black women were maids or trauma props, but we can't talk about the 1980s without mentioning the show 227. 227 is amazing. If you've never watched the show 227, I highly recommend it. It is a classic. 227 was a black-led sitcom that aired on NBC from 1985 to 1990 and was created by Christine Houston, a black woman. And it was led by the likes of black all-stars Marla Gibbs, Jackie Harry, and Helen Martin, and it was where Regina King made her acting debut as a child. The show portrayed life for black families living in a close-knit, middle-class, predominantly black community in an apartment building in DC. It focused on themes of family, friendship, community gossip, and everyday middle-class Black life. When I think about the show 227, I think about my aunties. You know, we're at the family reunion, my Aunt Zondra's right there, my mother's right there, my Aunt Charlotte's right there, and they just gossip and talking about whatever, catching each other up. I grew up in a neighborhood that was all Black for the most part, and everybody knew everybody. You know, I could not walk down the street with somebody calling Nita my mother and saying, you know, Laurie, she did this. You know, she walking down the street with this boy. She being fresh. When I watched the show 227, it kind of reminded me of that sense of community that I've been exposed to throughout my life. That's why the show 227 is very near and dear to my heart. And I feel like it was a show that was one of the first to more closely provide representation of community, of Black community. So now we are in the 90s. The 90s came in hot. Living Single, Moesha, Martin, Fresh Prince, In Living Color, the Wayans brothers, Jamie Foxx. I can go on and on and on. This is the renaissance of Black sitcoms. During this time, we saw many shows that were written by Black creators. I have so many good memories growing up watching these shows as a child. This was a golden age for Black entertainers, but like with everything else, there were caveats. Nothing is perfect. We are still chipping away at that barrier. Networks like Fox and UPN flooded their lineups with Black-led shows, then quietly pivoted once they got the numbers. Black-led shows were often underpromoted or canceled despite great ratings. And then came the one and only Living Single. Truly ahead of its time, iconic. Created by Yvette Lee Bowser, the first Black woman to run a primetime show for Black women, complex, smart, fly, rooted in Black culture. Need I say more? We got to witness their friendships, style, ambition, and joy. And this show wasn't made to be universal. It was made to more closely represent the lives of Black women. And while the show centered Black women, the male characters, they were fully fleshed out and defined as well, also rooted in Black culture. They also pushed boundaries in significant ways.
The image of the Black male on television reached a level of prominent displays, at least within a quasi-positive sense, far earlier than that of Black women, and that primarily has to do with misogynoir. You see, the Black male image has gone through the cycles of acceptability as related to the behavior expected by us in predominant white culture. We have the deferential, sometimes sad, but most of the time jovial figure, you know, zippity-doo-dah and all that, right? After that, you have the Sambo or the Savage, the image used as justification to terrorize Black communities. Next, you have the respectable versus not respectable images coalescing in the 60s and 70s with the natural hair movements. Only recently, within the last decade or so, has there been a resurgence in a Black sitcom that shows a more balanced representation than that of predominantly white shows. Let's look at Overton and Kyle from Living Single, two roommates and best friends that live next door to our female castmates. Seem familiar? Anyway, these two gentlemen maintain the cultural signifiers of Black masculinity while demonstrating respectability as identified through the white lens. Basically, they can perform authentic Blackness without delving into stereotypes. Now, these men are written as best friends who grew up and moved in with each other. Initially, they were supposed to be cousins, but creator Yvette Lee Bowser decided to move away from that angle since they already had cousins on the show, with Khadijah and Sinclair. And if you didn't know that tidbit about them growing up together or almost being related in a story, you'd be forgiven for assuming that they met sometime in adulthood. The two definitely share a sort of odd couple dynamic, with Overton dispensing homegrown wisdom usually punctuated by a quote from his uncle Smoke Eye, you know, just a salt-of-the-earth, solid blue-collar brother. And we can compare that to Kyle, who represents Black excellence, which is just Black capitalism, but that's a different topic. But Kyle represents that drive to make it in a corporate world while maintaining an aesthetic that is very Black, which was a prominent part of his character, actually being the basis of an episode wherein a co-worker tries to convince Kyle to cut his hair to better assimilate to his place of employment. These men represent Black men without the Blackness trademark as written by white writers, even though they were written by white writers, which just proves that they understand nuance and oftentimes choose not to use it. Which is still better, worse, different from how Black men are written in white sitcoms. Where I really noticed this was on shows like The New Girl, who had two main castmates that were Black, though rarely at the same time. And I remember them being referenced in a joke about how only recently could you have more than one Black person in a show and not have it be a Black show. And they mostly did this through colorblind writing, or realistically writing them as if they were white guys. There is no such thing as colorblindness. How we engage with the world, including how people are represented, are filtered through our own experiences, and race is a big part of that experience.
Living Single broke new ground. Complex characters, real storylines, and unapologetically black. And then later that year, the show Friends debuted. It used the same recipe as Living Single did. But the problem is that Friends got that big syndication check. It got the huge legacy that isn't just part of this niche following. Living Single was successful, not just to black audience. Living Single was hugely successful, but because the industry decided that Friends was the safer option, they became highly syndicated.
What if I told you that you remember Friends not because it was a great show, but because you were told to? Now don't get me wrong, Friends is a good show. There aren't a lot of bad shows that make it that. Well, I'll take that back. There are actually tons of bad shows that end up with several seasons. I'm looking at you, Big Bang Theory. But I wouldn't call Friends one of them. As has been made obvious by the breadth of this video, we don't hate Friends, but when truly compared to the shows that came prior and directly afterwards, it's just okay. The critical reception of Living Single in recent years is far more positive than that of Friends when evaluated the same way, but at least for now, Friends still benefits from being second, being the beta test that moved to launch. We remember it through rose-colored lenses and syndication, half-glimpsed episodes while we wait in a dentist's office. The truth behind why is both more sinister and benign than you would assume. Or maybe not. You see, I don't think you're stupid. But the execs in charge of programming definitely think so. When you get down to it, we remember Friends more because of racism and a perceived need to dumb down content. Let me use an analogy real quick. I used to be a professional cook. Not top chef level, but you know, your boy can get down. Now when it came to developing a recipe, we needed to account for the lowest common denominator, meaning we needed to dull down spices and flavors enough so that whatever original components were still there, but toned down enough so that even the most beige, milquetoast, ketchup is spicy type of person could enjoy a sample. That's Friends in a nutshell. You're not trusted to handle confrontations, concepts that don't directly speak to you, or characters that don't look like you. Ultimately, they think you're dumb and racist, and by pulling funding and support for one show while propping up the other, they don't give you any opportunity to learn about something that might be dope. Now, Living Single was a pretty wholesome show, but compared to Friends, it was damn near confrontational. We went from a show that had episodes involving a character considering the use of a loan shark to save their business, to a show where the most confrontational thing that occurs is the creation of the friend zone. And even that is only reflection on how Ross was a legit creeper in that show. And I'm not here to rehash the dozens of breakdowns on how Ross was manipulative or how his relationship with Rachel was more red flag than romance. That ground's been covered. What I will say is, Friends had the raw material to do something better. One of Chandler's parents was a trans woman. Ross's ex-wife was a lesbian. Phoebe was a former street kid out here hitting licks. These are topics that could have been handled with sincerity while still making for great content. A little tonal shift in writing would have made a good show a great show. But it's exactly a shift away from serious tones that made Friends the show that it is today, and that's not really a compliment. Friends was a safe option. The option that syndicators knew they could sell to Midwestern market so long as they avoided politics. And we remember it because we were told to. Because we've been convinced that the photo negative was just as good as their original photo. You remember Friends because the producers didn't think white America could handle the same thing in black. They don't believe that you can think abstractly, that you can imprint on characters that don't share the same phenotype. And if that's not an insult to everyone's intelligence, I don't know what is.
In the 2000s, a lot of black sitcoms were silently axed. No scandals, no headlines, they just disappeared. Networks chased broader or whiter audiences, and syndication dried up. BET and UPN became the home of these black sitcoms, or rather, the graveyard. And you know, BET gave these shows some visibility, but in comparison to their white-led counterparts, not even close. Shows like Girlfriends, The Parkers, and Half built huge audiences, but were not given the same treatment as white-led shows that have been preserved, rebooted, and canonized. And so representation isn't just about who gets on air, it's about who is remembered. Today we've got Insecure, Abbott Elementary, Atlanta, all shows created by black artists who hold the pen and the camera. But even today, these shows are still exceptions to the rule. The story of black women in television is not just about who's on screen. It's about how they're framed, who gets to write them, and who gets to remember them. It's a history full of erasure, compromise, resistance, and reinvention. And over the years, progress was made little by little, slowly chipping away at the barrier placed on black women in television. You know, when you think about the trajectory of starting at Beulah and just to living single, not even looking at shows like Insecure, but just to living single alone, it is truly awe-inspiring. This was all made possible by black creatives that pushed for more, by civil rights activists who pushed and fought for more. And as I reflect on this video, I also think about the impact that Nichelle Nichols made on many young black girls who decided to go into STEM fields. That alone, oh my God, it makes me want to cry. And also the path that Living Single paved for current as well as future actors and writers and other creatives in entertainment. Today we have Issa Rae, we have Shonda Rhimes, we have Zendaya, Kerry Washington, Viola Davis. And without the impact that all of these amazing women had in the entertainment industry, they more than likely would not be here today doing what they're doing. So yeah, that's the end of my video. Thanks for watching Old Dirty History. If you learned something, if you felt something, please leave a comment, share it, like it, do all the things. Were there any shows that you watched that helped shape how you saw black women in television? And one thing before I go, a big shout out to Fat Charlie, fellow content creator here on YouTube. Thank you for being part of this video. Please check out my boy Fat Charlie's channel. I included the link in the description below. He's an amazing creator who discusses various topics on pop culture, race, as well as gender. So definitely check him out. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys, and peace out. That did not go as well as I wanted it to.